The sun had barely crested the horizon over the historic grounds of West Point when a tense energy began to stir in the cool autumn air. At the United States Military Academy, everything was known for its disciplined order and rigorous routines. Here, every detail was planned down to the second, and surprises were as rare as unscheduled drills. Yet on this particular morning, as the crisp lights spilled across the neatly arranged parade grounds, there was an undercurrent of anticipation, a feeling that today something extraordinary was about to happen. Cadet Brandon Ellis, a young man whose determination had carried him through the grueling challenges of West Point, sensed it before he saw it. As he moved along the polished stone walkways with his fellow cadets, an unusual hush began to spread through the ranks. Whispers rippled like a current, carrying words he couldn't quite decipher. "Something's happening. Pay attention. Listen up." Brandon's heart pounded with a mix of curiosity and anxiety. He had grown used to the regimented life of West Point, where every moment was choreographed, and yet today, the unspoken energy felt electric and raw. At precisely 7:30 a.m., a sudden order blared across the loudspeakers. "All cadets, assemble at the main courtyard immediately." The command was delivered with such urgency that there was no room for questions or delay. In unison, the cadets converged on the courtyard, a vast expanse bordered by the Academy's venerable stone buildings and meticulously trimmed lawns. The atmosphere was charged. Even the usually impassive faces of the cadets betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. Brandon joined his fellow cadets, all of them standing in rigid formation as they awaited further instruction. The murmur of hushed voices gradually fell silent, replaced by the heavy sound of anticipation. And then, as if heralded by fate itself, the roar of engines broke through the quiet. A convoy of black SUVs, sleek and imposing, rolled into the courtyard with military precision. Their engines rumbled steadily, blending with the hushed excitement of the assembled cadets. Doors clicked open, and a well-disciplined team of Secret Service agents dressed sharply in dark suits emerged from the vehicles. Every eye in the courtyard turned toward the convoy. Even the cadets, trained to remain stoic in the face of surprises, could not hide their curiosity. The atmosphere shifted perceptibly when the lead SUV's door opened, and emerging into the crisp morning air came none other than President Donald Trump. His presence was magnetic. A figure who had commanded headlines for years now appeared on the grounds of West Point, his every step measured and confident. He walked with the assured gait of a man who knew he belonged in every room he entered, yet his eyes held an intensity that spoke of purpose beyond the pomp of public office. The president's arrival was not heralded by a formal salute or a prearranged ceremony. Instead, the air seemed to crackle with electricity as the cadets snapped to full attention. The silence that fell was absolute, a moment in which every cadet, every observer, felt that something transformative was unfolding. Brandon's pulse raced as he watched the president's eyes sweep over the assembled young men. It was as if Trump was measuring each cadet not merely as a soldier, but as an individual with potential yet untapped. And then, in an instant that would be forever etched in Brandon's memory, President Trump's gaze locked directly onto him. For a split second, time seemed to slow. Brandon felt as though the entire world had narrowed to the steady, unyielding focus of the president's eyes. Then, with deliberate calm, Trump pointed directly at Brandon. "You," he said, his voice resonating over the silent courtyard like a command carved in stone, "step forward." Brandon's stomach clenched. His mind raced with questions. Why me? What could he possibly want from a cadet among hundreds? His training had taught him to obey orders without hesitation, yet this directive felt personal, almost unnerving. With a heavy heart and shaking boots, Brandon stepped out of formation. Every step seemed to echo his inner turmoil. The eyes of his fellow cadets tracked his movement, their faces a mixture of tension and silent support. No one spoke. Everyone knew that when the president calls a man forward, the moment carries weight far beyond ordinary instruction. As Brandon approached the president, his senses sharpened. He could now see every detail. The crisp crease of Trump's tailored suit, the confident set of his jaw, the piercing quality in his eyes. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. President Trump stopped a few feet away and, without preamble, asked in a tone that brooked no argument, "What's your name, son?" Brandon swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "Cadet Brandon Ellis, sir," he replied, the words barely audible yet laden with all the training and discipline that had brought him here. Trump nodded slowly, as though he were weighing the very essence of Brandon's character. Then, without missing a beat, he asked a question that made Brandon's pulse spike. "You ever doubt yourself?" In that instant, Brandon's mind raced. Every night at West Point, in the quiet darkness of his dorm, he had wrestled with the demons of self-doubt, questions of whether he was strong enough, smart enough, worthy enough to carry the honor of his training. But in that charged moment, facing the president himself, the admission felt like a betrayal of all he had been taught. Yet, his instincts told him to answer in the way expected of a cadet. Confidently, resolutely, "No, sir," he said, his voice steady even as his heart thundered. But something in Trump's eyes told him that the simple "no" was not enough. The president tilted his head, a faint smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "That's a good answer," he said, pausing just long enough for the words to hang in the air. "But I don't buy it." A ripple of unease swept through the cadet formation. Trump's words were unexpected, too honest, too raw for a setting where perfection was the norm. He then continued, his tone growing more measured and reflective. "Every leader doubts themselves at some point. Anyone who claims otherwise is lying. The difference is what you do with that doubt." His gaze held Brandon's as he spoke, the intensity in his eyes making Brandon's heart race with both fear and anticipation. After a long pause that felt like an eternity, Trump's voice grew even more deliberate. "I want to give you a test," he declared. The command was simple, but its implications were immense. Brandon's mind whirled. What kind of test? Had he been chosen not only to represent his peers, but to prove something to the commander-in-chief himself? The president's eyes sparkled with a challenge. "Hope you're ready," he said, and without another word, he turned to his aides. "Get a team together." Murmurs spread among the cadets, some in disbelief, others with an undercurrent of excitement. The aides, with practiced efficiency, stepped forward and called out the names of 4 other cadets. One by one, the selected individuals stepped out of the formation, joining Brandon in a small group that now stood apart from the rest of their classmates. Trump looked at the newly formed team, then turned to the officers overseeing the drill. "That'll do," he said, his voice resonating with an authority that left no room for debate. Turning back to the group, he addressed them all. "Follow me." Brandon's heart pounded as he and the 4 cadets fell into step behind the president. Their formation moved as one, a single unit stepping away from the familiar discipline of West Point into a space of uncertainty. The convoy led them through the campus, past the stately, time-worn buildings that had witnessed countless military traditions, and out toward waiting Humvees. The Secret Service agents flanked them, their expressions masked and unreadable. Inside the vehicle, the atmosphere was thick with silence. The engine's low rumble underscored the tension, and the rhythmic passing of the Academy's landscape outside the windows seemed to echo the rapid beat of Brandon's pulse. He exchanged brief, uncertain glances with his fellow cadets, each of them equally unprepared for what was coming next. After what felt like an eternity of anxious anticipation, the Humvee slowed to a stop. The vehicle doors opened, and the group was motioned to disembark onto a rugged training ground tucked away from the pristine symmetry of West Point. This new location was a stark contrast to the orderly courtyards they had left behind. It was a simulated battlefield, complete with torn-up earth, makeshift barricades, scattered debris, and even strands of barbed wire that glinted ominously in the morning light. A staff sergeant, his uniform immaculate yet his expression all business, stood waiting with an air of resolute efficiency. He gave a curt nod to President Trump, who then addressed the assembled cadets with a gravity that made every word count. "Out there, somewhere in this course, is a wounded soldier," he said, gesturing toward the chaos of the simulated battlefield. "Your mission: locate him, stabilize him, and bring him back safely." Brandon's heart pounded even faster. He had participated in countless drills and training exercises at West Point, but this mission felt different. It was not merely an exercise, but a test of his ability to lead under pressure. His mind raced through every piece of training, every lesson drilled into him about decision-making, teamwork, and resilience. Now, with the weight of the president's challenge on his shoulders, he understood that failure was not an option. Trump's voice cut through the mounting tension. "One more thing," he said, his tone lowering. "Only one of you will be in charge." The statement hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown. Before anyone could fully register its meaning, Trump pointed directly at Brandon. "You," he said firmly, "you lead this team." A surge of shock and self-doubt coursed through Brandon. He had always been a hard-working cadet, but he had never imagined being thrust into such a critical role. His mind screamed questions. Why me? What if I'm not good enough? Yet, deep within, a spark of determination ignited. Leadership, he had learned, was not about being perfect. It was about rising to the occasion when no one else would. Taking a steadying breath, Brandon looked to the 5 cadets gathered before him. "Our objective," he declared, his voice steady despite the roaring chaos in his mind, "is to find the wounded soldier, stabilize him, and bring him back safely. We have no room for error." He quickly assessed the terrain. A labyrinth of obstacles designed to test both physical endurance and mental acuity. Cadet Reynolds, you're on point. Keep your eyes peeled for any signs of movement. Cadet Owens, you're our scout. Flank left and report back if you spot anything. The rest of you, cover our flanks and support wherever needed. With roles assigned, the team took off into the simulated battlefield. Brandon led them forward with a mixture of determination and trepidation. The training ground was a gauntlet of obstacles. Dense smoke from simulated explosions obscured their vision. Uneven terrain threatened to trip them up, and every so often, sudden sounds of simulated gunfire and orders rang out, heightening the sense of urgency. The first major challenge came in the form of a thick wall of smoke that billowed unexpectedly from hidden generators. Visibility dropped to near zero. "Stay together," Brandon shouted, his voice barely rising above the roar of the artificial chaos. The cadets huddled close, their hands and eyes straining to catch any glimpse of the wounded soldier's whereabouts. In the disorienting haze, every sound was magnified, every step felt uncertain. It was a trial of both endurance and mental clarity, a test that separated those who could adapt from those who would falter. As the smoke began to dissipate, the team emerged to confront another obstacle, a wide, deep-water trench that cut across their path. The cadets exchanged nervous glances. The water, though only a simulation, was icy and unyielding. 2 options presented themselves: either wade through the water and risk slowing down significantly, or use a rope suspended overhead to swing across. A risky maneuver that could result in a fall. Brandon made the call swiftly. "Take the rope. We need to keep our momentum." One by one, his team attempted the crossing. Cadet Reynolds went first, his athletic frame making the passage seem effortless. Cadet Owens followed, then the others. One cadet, however, lost his footing, a slip that sent a splash of cold water cascading over him. Brandon rushed to his aid, and together, with firm grips and steady commands, they hauled the struggling cadet to safety. There was no time for self-pity. Failure was not an option. With the trench behind them, the team advanced through a gauntlet of barriers, ranging from low-lying walls to scattered debris that threatened to trip them up. The environment was harsh and unforgiving, designed to simulate the unpredictability of real-life combat. Every muscle in Brandon's body screamed in protest, but he pressed on, urging his team forward. "Eyes on the objective," he called. "We're almost there." Then came the final, most grueling stretch, a narrow, winding path leading to the simulated casualties location. The cadets moved as one, their formation tight, their resolve unyielding despite the fatigue etched into their every step. A faint, desperate cry emerged from behind a collapsed wooden structure, a sound that sent adrenaline surging through them. "That's it!" Brandon shouted. "The wounded is close." He led his team toward the source of the cry, and soon, amidst a pile of simulated rubble and sandbags, they found the wounded soldier. A lifelike dummy rigged with realistic injuries. The casualty's condition was clearly staged, a broken leg, shallow breathing, and simulated blood streaming from a gash on the side. "Stabilize him, now!" Brandon ordered, dropping to his knees beside the dummy. His team moved with precision. One cadet opened the emergency medkit, another applied a tourniquet to the dummy's leg, while Brandon himself worked swiftly to secure the casualty on a makeshift stretcher. Every movement was deliberate, every second precious. The simulation was designed with a strict time limit. 1 minute remained before the exercise would be declared a failure. The seconds ticked by in a blur of focused activity. With barely seconds to spare, the cadets hoisted the stretcher and began the arduous journey back to the start line. The terrain had not eased. The final stretch was fraught with obstacles. A sudden simulated explosion sent shockwaves through the ground, causing debris to fly, and an unexpected simulated gunfire volley forced the team to duck and dodge. Brandon's lungs burned, his arms trembled with exhaustion, and yet he pressed on, leading his team as if his life depended on it. Because, in a way, it did. With the countdown ticking in the background, every step felt monumental. In the final moments, a misstep nearly cost them dearly. Cadet Reynolds stumbled over a loose rock, threatening to topple the stretcher. A collective gasp rose from the group, and in that split second, Brandon's voice cut through the panic. "Regroup. Move as one." The cadets rallied, their training kicking in as they adjusted their grip and forced themselves forward. In the last 2 seconds, with hearts pounding and adrenaline at its peak, the team crossed the finish line just as the timer hit 0. A heavy silence followed, a silence filled with relief, exhaustion, and the raw, unspoken acknowledgement of what they had just accomplished. Then, from the edge of the training ground, President Trump's voice rang out, cool and measured. "Not bad. Not perfect, but not bad at all." His words, though sparse, carried the weight of approval and the promise of further challenge. Brandon stood, chest heaving, still struggling to catch his breath. The eyes of his fellow cadets met his, a mixture of respect, relief, and lingering doubt in their gazes. Then, to Brandon's surprise, Trump turned toward him. "Walk with me, Brandon," he said simply, and for a moment the chaotic simulation and the physical trial faded into the background. All that remained was the quiet intensity of a one-on-one moment that would define Brandon's future. Brandon hesitated, his mind reeling from the test he had just endured. A test that had pushed him to the very edge of his physical and mental limits. He had always questioned himself in silence, wondering if he truly belonged among the best of West Point. But now, with the president standing right beside him, the doubts seemed to echo in the silence between them. The pair walked slowly along a quiet pathway near the training grounds. The sound of distant chatter from the returning cadets, the hum of engines, and the soft rustle of the autumn leaves provided a gentle counterpoint to the gravity of their conversation. Trump's gaze was fixed on Brandon, his expression unreadable, but his eyes conveying a mixture of challenge and encouragement. "You hesitated at the start," Trump said, his tone measured. "Did you ever think you weren't the right man for the job?" His question was not accusatory but probing, as if he wanted to uncover the truth behind Brandon's internal struggle. Brandon's heart pounded as he met the president's gaze. In that moment, he had two choices: deny his doubts and mask his vulnerability, or be honest about the fear that sometimes gripped him in the quiet moments alone. The memories of sleepless nights and moments of self-doubt surged up, but before he could speak, he managed to say, "Yes, sir. Sometimes I do." Trump nodded slowly, his eyes softening just a fraction. "That's what makes you human," he said. "Every leader at some point faces doubt. It isn't the absence of fear that defines you. It's how you move forward despite it." The words, simple and direct, struck a chord in Brandon's soul. For years he had believed that leadership meant being invincible, never faltering, but now he understood that true strength lay in acknowledging one's fears and still choosing to act. They walked in silence for a few moments, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Finally, Trump paused and reached into a sleek briefcase at his side. From it, he withdrew two sealed envelopes, one red, one blue. "I'm going to give you a choice," he said, holding the envelopes out in front of Brandon. "Pick one." Brandon's stomach churned. "Sir, what do these envelopes contain?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Trump's expression remained calm, almost enigmatic. "That, my friend, is for you to decide," he replied with a slight smirk. "But remember, real leadership isn't about choosing the easy path." After a long, tense moment, Brandon reached out with shaking fingers and picked up the red envelope. He tore it open slowly, revealing a single sentence printed on crisp paper. "You fail the mission, but save your team." Brandon's breath caught in his throat. For someone raised to believe that the mission always came first, that to fail was unacceptable, the words cut deep. Trump then pointed to the unopened blue envelope and said, "That one says you complete the mission but lose a man." The silence that followed was deafening. Brandon's mind raced. Failure had never been an option, yet here was a test, one that forced him to confront a choice he had never been trained to make. Every decision in the field was about minimizing loss, but this was different. It was a test of moral leadership, of weighing the cost of success against the value of a human life. Taking a steadying breath, Brandon looked up at Trump. "Sir," he said, his voice stronger than he felt, "I choose to save my team, even if that means I fail the mission." His words hung in the air, heavy with conviction and raw vulnerability. Trump's smirk softened, replaced by an expression of quiet approval. "That's the kind of leader I like to see," he said, patting Brandon's shoulder. "You own your decision and you live with it. Remember, leadership isn't about never making mistakes. It's about making the right choices in the moment, even when they cost you." In that instant, a transformation occurred within Brandon. The doubts that had plagued him for so long, the whispers of inadequacy, the fear of not being enough, began to fade into the background. He realized that the measure of a leader wasn't perfection. It was the courage to act when it mattered most, to take responsibility even when the cost was high. As he stood there, still processing the weight of his decision, Trump turned back to the group of cadets who had gathered around, his voice ringing out with finality. "Remember, leadership is not about you, it's about what you do for others." With that, the convoy of black SUVs soon reassembled, and the day's events drew to a close. Brandon rejoined his fellow cadets, his mind racing with new resolve and understanding. He had been tested in ways he never thought possible, and he had emerged, not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. In the weeks that followed, news of the extraordinary incident spread throughout West Point and beyond. Among the cadets, whispers turned into discussions, and Brandon's ordeal became a quiet legend. A story told in hushed tones in the barracks and classrooms about the day when President Trump personally challenged one of their own. His decision, a mix of raw honesty and courageous leadership, resonated deeply with many. For Brandon, every day on campus now carried a new meaning. No longer was he merely a student undergoing rigorous training. He was a leader who had been forced to face his own doubts and emerge with a commitment to always put his team first. Off campus, the story made its way into the broader national conversation. Military blogs, leadership seminars, and even mainstream news outlets highlighted the incident as a powerful reminder of what true leadership looked like. The narrative wasn't about a simple drill or a routine exercise. It was about the transformative power of personal responsibility in the face of adversity. Cadets from all over the country began sharing their own moments of vulnerability and triumph, inspired by Brandon's example. Officers and trainers integrated discussions about moral courage into their lessons, emphasizing that every decision, no matter how small, contributed to the character of a true leader. For President Trump, the encounter was a moment that, according to those close to him, left an impression. Though his public persona was often associated with bold statements and grand gestures, those who witnessed the interaction later recalled that he seemed genuinely moved by Brandon's willingness to confront his doubts. He looked at that young man like he saw something in him, a spark that many of us forget exists, one aide later confided, and while the conversation that day was brief, its impact was far-reaching, serving as a quiet testament to the fact that leadership is as much about introspection as it is about command. Back at West Point, Brandon's life slowly began to change. In the quiet hours of the night, as he sat in his dorm room reflecting on the day's events, he realized that the true test of a leader was not in avoiding failure, but in learning from it. He began to see his doubts not as a sign of weakness, but as opportunities for growth. His interactions with fellow cadets grew more empathetic. He took time to listen to their struggles and offered encouragement where he once might have simply given orders. Slowly, the weight of self-doubt began to lift, replaced by a quiet confidence that came from knowing he had faced his fears head-on. Brandon's story, shared discreetly among the cadets, soon became a part of the academy's lore. In study halls and training grounds, instructors would sometimes refer back to the day the president had challenged one of their own, using it as an example of how critical moments of decision can define the future. It wasn't a lesson in tactical maneuvers or physical endurance. It was a lesson in moral fortitude, in the understanding that sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that test not just your skill, but your character. Beyond West Point, the story resonated with people from all walks of life, veterans and active duty soldiers, many of whom had faced their own moments of doubt under extreme pressure, found solace in Brandon's experience. Civilian leaders began to incorporate similar lessons into their management training, emphasizing that the choices we make when faced with impossible options shape not only our careers, but the lives of those who depend on us. In boardrooms and community centers, discussions emerged about the importance of ethical leadership and the willingness to take responsibility, even when the outcomes were uncertain. In time, Brandon Ellis's journey at West Point became more than just a personal anecdote. It became a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that every challenge, no matter how daunting, could be overcome by confronting it head-on. The memory of that fateful day remained with him, a constant reminder that leadership wasn't about always being right or never hesitating. It was about doing what had to be done, even when the stakes were impossibly high. Years later, as Brandon Ellis graduated from West Point and embarked on a long military career, the lessons of that day continued to guide him. He often recalled the moment when President Trump had locked eyes with him, the weight of the challenge in his words, and the decision he had been forced to make. It was a defining moment, one that not only changed his outlook on leadership, but also instilled in him a lifelong commitment to serve others with empathy, integrity, and courage. Brandon went on to command units in challenging environments, always carrying with him the memory of that test. In every mission, he strived to lead by example, always mindful of the balance between achieving objectives and preserving the well-being of his team. His decisions, sometimes difficult and fraught with risk, were made with the conviction that every life was worth the sacrifice, even if it meant accepting personal failure in order to protect those under his command. Later in his career, Brandon became a mentor to younger cadets, often recounting the story of the day when the president had put him on the spot. "We all have doubts," he would say, his voice gentle yet firm, "but the measure of a true leader is not that we never feel fear. It's that we face it, we acknowledge it, and then we act anyway." His words resonated with the next generation of soldiers, instilling in them the understanding that leadership is a continuous journey, a journey that requires constant self-reflection, courage, and above all, the willingness to put others before oneself. Outside the military, Brandon's story began to inspire leaders in business, education, and community organizations. His experience at West Point was featured in leadership seminars and motivational speeches, serving as a reminder that the challenges we face can shape us in ways we never imagined. In every retelling, the narrative emphasized that true leadership is not defined by titles or accolades, but by the choices we make in moments of uncertainty. Choices that ultimately determine the course of our lives and the lives of those we lead. And so, the legacy of that extraordinary day lived on. A legacy not forged in the grand gestures of politics or the rhetoric of public speeches, but in the quiet, often unseen moments of personal courage. For Brandon Ellis and for everyone who has ever doubted themselves, the memory of that test remained a beacon of hope, a promise that even in the face of overwhelming doubt, we have the power to choose, to act, and to lead. As you reflect on this story, consider what it means to step forward in moments of uncertainty. True leadership isn't about always having the perfect answer. It's about having the courage to decide, to accept the consequences, and to learn from every experience. It's a lesson that transcends West Point, reaching into every corner of our lives, challenging us to be better, to serve others, and to never let fear or doubt hold us back. If this story has inspired you or made you think about the power of leadership in new ways, please like, comment, and subscribe. Share your own experiences and let us know. What is the biggest leadership lesson you have ever learned? Every step, no matter how small, has the power to change not only your life, but the world around you.